Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. Today's topic, AB Suite 7.0, collaborate to bring new secure apps faster to market with new AB Suite release. Our presenters for you today are Thanga Panasamy, Senior Product Manager with Unisys, and Charles Bartholomew, Senior Architect with Unisys. And with that, Thanga, the audience is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the AB Suite enthusiasts who have joined this webinar. Thank you for joining this webinar. So, as Matt mentioned, I'm Thanga. I'm a Senior Product Manager, and I manage the AB Suite product. And joining me in this webinar is Charlie, who's a Senior Architect, and he'll be providing a more detailed technical update later on. We are hoping we're going to have some fun in this webinar, and in this process going to get to learn the new features in the 7.0 release, and hopefully you find them useful and get to use them in your environment as well. So, with every new release, we tend to bring in a balanced set of features. We typically look at, what's happening in the market. From a trends standpoint, we look at the new feature suggestions from our clients, which we call as the NFS. And we also try to bring in some new features in line with the AB Suite strategy that we put together. So I'm happy to say that, we have brought in a number of new features, balancing these three aspects that I just now mentioned. And most of the features are broadly covered under three themes. The first one being the tighter security, second one being the ease of use, and third being the improved productivity. So at the end of it, we are hoping with this new release, our clients are going to see secure, even more productive apps with AB Suite. But even before I get started with the talking about the new features in itself, and going into deep dive with that, just for the benefit of people who are new to AB Suite, I would like to give a brief introduction about the product itself. So AB Suite is a unique model-driven environment, for mission-critical solutions. So AB Suite provides a development environment in which business and technical professionals truly collaborate and design capabilities at business level. The value proposition of this particular product is that people should focus on what application should do and not worry about how it should be coded or deployed. And with the AB Suite developer, because it's model-driven development based, they define a platform-independent model of the business application, and they can generate it for two, different environments. One is the Unisys Premier, the ClearPath MCP environment, and the other is a Microsoft Windows environment. And because Visual Studio is popular, the AB Suite developer is actually built as a package within the Microsoft Visual Studio. And as you see in this particular slide here, we have broadly three sets of components. First is the system modeler, which basically helps to define the application in business terms. And then we have the builder component, which translates the business terms into runtime elements. And then we have the automated test tool, which helps to define and run test cases. And as I said, we have two runtime environments, which is the MCP and the Windows. And just as a just to bring in the point here is that from our experience in the market has been that many vendors talk about modern model-driven development, but I think AB Suite is one of those very few products in the market which actually is able to generate a whole solution from the model. And it is not just for the Windows environment, right? It is for the Premier Unisys ClearPath MCP environment as well. And I think it's truly a unique and a differentiating feature about the AB Suite product. So with that, I'll move to the next slide. So in this slide, we are talking about one of the how a particular client what was the challenge they had and what is the solution they used. So the challenge they had was to expand the agri-business, and they used ClearPath and AB Suite for application development. The benefits they achieved were improved speed to market, ability to make fast and informed business decisions. So, I mean, this kind of benefits is something most of the AB Suite, clients realize. And it is not just the external clients who reap the benefits of the AB Suite product. Within Unisys internally as well, we have a number of industry solutions which use the AB Suite product. For those of you who follow the Developing Agility newsletter, which is our periodic newsletter, talks about various AB Suite articles. In the last one, we talked about, how AB Suite is used in some of the Unisys industry solutions, such as, Unisys Financial Services System, which is called as the UFSS, and the Universal Voice Messaging System, which is the UVMS. So I just wanted to bring in that, it's clients both externally and internally, tend to use AB Suite and, see several benefits with that. So with that, I'm going to get started with the new features that we have for the 7.0 release. And the first theme we're going to cover is the tighter security. So I think, as we have seen, security is becoming important year on year, and we believe that 2019 is probably going to be one of the most security conscious year, because as we do see that cyber attacks are on an increase, and they're exploiting new vulnerabilities. So it has been seen that about 81% of the data breaches are caused by stolen credentials, and about $7 million is the average company cost of a breach worldwide. So what that would mean is that clients have to step up their the levels of their security, or make themselves more secure. And in addition to that, clients also have the need to adhere to the new regulations. And 2018 in particular was a landmark year because of the GDPR regulation. And I think GDPR is one of the most important data privacy regulation in the last 20 years. While it is not just applicable only for the the countries in the European Union, but it is applicable for other countries located in other locations also, particularly if they're going to process the personal data of people residing in the European Union. And it is very important that they adhere to it, because the penalties of the GDPR compliance, if not met, could be extremely high. So it's very important that clients take necessary steps to adhere to GDPR and to make the systems more secure. So one of the things that we have tried to build in AB Suite is that 7.0 release is that we have looked at security from the data in rest security and data in transit security. So for data in rest, which is typically the data in the DMS2 databases, we have been thinking about how to make them more secure. So with this release, we have the encryption, the data encryption feature. So so that it can encrypt the persistent data in your application database. And DMS2 allows two encryption algorithms. One is the AES-GM and the other is AES-HMAC. These are two popular advanced encryption algorithms. And in order for clients to use that, they need to use MCP 18, because DMS2 started supporting the field level encryption from MCP 18. So that's the bare minimum MCP level clients need to have. And in addition, they need to have the data encryption product as well. Charlie will, in the subsequent technical update, he'll cover more details in terms of the prerequisites and other details. So we believe that with this particular feature, it helps you to protect the sensitive data. In the past, we had other security features, but this goes a step further to enhance your security further, right? So, and it also helps you to adhere to the regulatory compliance, because I think encryption is one of the key features, key ways to do that. So in the next slide, we're talking about the data in motion security. So it is, we are again seeing that clients, especially the financial sector clients or the public sector clients, they have personally identifiable information or the financial data that is being communicated between the AB Suite component enabler and the ClearPath MCP runtime host. So this needs to be secured. So for AB Suite 7.0, we have brought in the TLS 1.2 support for the rattle. So with that, the data, the packets are secured now, especially when the client communicates via rattle between the component enabler and the ClearPath MCP runtime host. In addition to that, we have also brought in many other security features as well. So I'm going to talk about some of the other security challenges that our clients faced and how we have addressed them in the 7.0 release. The first other security challenge is that clients have the need for guaranteed deletion of persistent data and want to ensure that it can never be retrieved. So for this release, we have the new sensitive data option that provides security for persistent data when it is deleted. So the way we have done it is that when a record is deleted from a database file, the disk area previously occupied by the record is scrubbed before being returned to the system for reallocation. So that way we can ensure that it is guaranteed deletion. The second security challenge that we also addressed is that clients have the need for granular logging of the verbs. So we have a new feature in the 7.0 through the log access verbs extension that allows for granular logging of one or more verbs that is useful for auditing purposes. As an example, if you specify the store and delete in the log access verbs list, any execution of the store and delete verbs will be logged in the system sum log. The third other security challenge, which we have seen and is the clients asking for encryption and compression of the audit trail as the file is copied to tape. So in the 7.0 release, we have within the DMS2 audit encrypt and compressed options are included in the audit trail specification. They enable the encryption and compression of the audit trail as the file is copied to tape. So with that, I'm going to move to the next section of features, which is going to address some of the under the theme of ease of use. So what we have seen is that developer experience is a significant differentiator for any organization's success, and we particularly care about the developers using the AB Suite product. So what we have done in this release is we have given attention to careful design, especially in cases like where we can prevent or reduce potential problems itself to occur in the first place. So we have been given careful design considerations around that so that the developer experience is improved. And we also acknowledge the fact that AB Suite product tends to be used by both experienced and inexperienced users. It could be somebody newly joined the team, or in some cases it could be an EAE client who's recently moved to AB Suite. So they're just still trying to learn with the product. So we have tried to see how we can enhance the experience for for a diverse set of developers. So we have been thinking about how to provide them flexibility and also how to give them a more intuitive way of development. So even before I talk about this, the standard mode feature, in terms of, just to give us a background, EAE applications, which still many clients use, has years or decades of careful design, development, effort, and execution. People have taken a lot of care to build them over years or decades, these EAE applications, and they're critical to clients' competitive position. So it's very important that clients reuse those applications in a very effective way when they move to AB Suite. And AB Suite has always made it very easy for our clients to upgrade from EAE to AB Suite, especially with things like import, export, and many other ease of use features. So in this release, we have again taken it a step further, to make it much more easier for our EAE clients to move to AB Suite. And we have addressed it through the standard mode feature. So what we have done in this feature is that we have seen that when a client wants to move from EAE to AB Suite, they want to focus on the upgrade to AB Suite as a success, move to AB Suite successfully as a first step, and then start leveraging the advanced features of AB Suite. So the standard mode exactly helps them to do that. So it provides a simplified set of capabilities, and the advanced features are either hidden or simplified, so that it eases the transition from using EAE to using AB Suite for development. And once they have moved to AB Suite and they have settled well on the standard mode and they're comfortable to start exploring the advanced features of the product, then they can move from the standard mode to the advanced mode. So what that allows is, it allows them a step manner, first to move to standard mode, move to AB Suite, settle down there well, stabilize, make yourself comfortable, and once you have done that, you can start exploring to the, the more advanced features. But in addition to this, well, the last slide talked largely about the standard mode. In addition, we have two more modes, which is the advanced mode and the user experience mode. So as I talked about in the previous slide, from an EAE client who moves to AB Suite, by default, they'll go to the standard mode, and then once they're comfortable, they go to the advanced mode. But what about the AB Suite clients who is using, like, for instance, a 5.0 or a 6.1, and in the typical classic mode, which we used to call earlier in the AB Suite 5.1, 6.1. So when they upgrade, they will automatically be upgraded to the AB Suite 7.0 advanced mode. And the advanced mode supports all the advanced features, including the polymorphism. We have a third mode, which is a user experience mode. This mode is applicable only for AB Suite Windows clients using the client framework. So, so before I talk about the export as feature, our experience has shown us that, clients typically want to upgrade the development environment first, play with the, the latest and greatest features, and then eventually want to upgrade their production environment. But when they're playing with the development environment, they still want the ability to move, some of the changes or, from their development to production environment. And in the previous AB Suite releases, we have always provided some kind of capability like that in our IC releases. So we had provided the ability to export changes from a higher IC to lower IC as long as they were within the same major release. And now with the AB Suite export as feature in AB Suite 7.0, clients can now export changes from the 7.0 release and import them into the previous release, which is the 6.1. So they can use the development environment in 7.0 and their development. They can use the development environment in 7.0 and they can use the production environment in 6.1. So this brings in two major benefits. A, it allows them to have their critical application environment changes to flow from AB Suite 7.0 development to AB Suite 6.1 production environment. And number two, it gives them sufficient time, for their application to be tested with the 7.0 release before their production is upgraded. So we again believe this is going to be a useful ease of use feature for the AB Suite clients. So in the next section, I'm going to talk about some of the runtime management features that we have and the improvements we have brought in there. So again, we have seen clients face a challenge, especially if there is a transaction failure. In the event of a transaction failure, in some cases, transactions may be resubmitted as part of the comms transaction failure replay. So clients need the ability to detect and potentially prevent the replay transactions, especially if it is interacting with external clients. Could be partners or it could be third-party agencies. So they also have the need to prevent automatic recovery of the reports. So with a new feature in this release, it provides the ability to detect within the AB Suite logic that a comms retry is occurring within an ISPEC transaction and appropriate action can be taken. So this basically, in terms of benefit, this helps to prevent the duplicated transactions. The other feature that we have, to improve, to better the runtime management is, the resource consumption, ability to manage the resource consumption. So again, clients have need to control the ISPEC resource consumption. It could be the database writes per transaction, maximum CPU time per transaction. They also need the ability to define the number of comms transaction retries. So with this with the new features in this release, they can specify the limits on the processor consumption or the database reads for an ISPEC. If the limit is breached, the GLB dot status will be set up appropriately, and interrupt procedures should be defined. So as an example, a client may wish to abort the transaction, or they may perform some other specific processing. So the benefit here is that, again, the client is able to meet A, the SLA commitments for the ISPEC response times, and B, they're able to better manage their the resource consumption. With that, I'm going to go to the last theme of features, which is basically the productivity enhancements that we have brought in the AB Suite 7.0 release. So from a productivity enhancements standpoint, we have seen that, clients have a need to store and retrieve large objects in the user's database. Okay, I think in the past we have supported external blobs, but clients want to store them in the user's database itself. And what kind of objects are they looking to store? They're looking to store MP4 files, Word documents, and MCP native files. So with this release, we are supporting internal blobs. There are new methods now supported on the external blobs that help to store and retrieve files from an internal blob. So they basically have methods. For instance, the read method, it persists the contents of a file into the database as a blob, and the write method retrieves the blob as a file. So that's one of the new feature we have added from a product. That is one of the feature we have added to enhance productivity. The second challenge from a productivity that we saw was that clients had a need for improved way of handling primitives. This release supports new entity for defining strings, numbers, and other primitive types. The primitive class has been deprecated. Automatic conversion from a primitive class to a primitive type happens on the upgrade. Similarly, we have also made enhancements to the debugger as well. So on initiating the debug session, there are certain auto configuration property, auto configure happens, which improves the productivity. And there have been some, performance improvements as well. And Charlie especially will be talking, a lot of the enhancements to the modeler, and especially the one I talked about, the primitives, he'll be touching them in more detail later on. Before we get into the detailed technical update by Charlie, I just want to give a little bit of overview in terms of what is the 7.0 prerequisite software. So for the AB Suite 7.0 developer, we would need Microsoft Visual Studio 2017, SQL Server 2017, Team Foundation Server 2018, and client has to either use Windows 10 or the Windows Server 2016 or 2019. We support for the AB Suite MCP runtime, the MCP release 18.0, which supports both the ETA and the Epsilon architecture. And for the release 17.0, we support the Epsilon architecture. And we support the ClearPath Forward Libra systems and the ClearPath MCP software series. Any of these that supports the MCP 18.0 or the 17.0. And for the Windows runtime, we support the Windows Server 2016 and 2019. For more details, you can check the software qualification matrix that will be available in the support site. And I also wanted to let everybody know that AB Suite release 7.0 is now available via digital download. So earlier we used to deliver them through the media. So now it's going to be much quicker through the digital download. With that, I complete my section, and I'm going to hand it over to Charlie, who's going to provide a more detailed technical update. Charlie, over to you.
Thank you, Thanga. And everyone, I appreciate your attendance today. As noted, I'm Charlie Bartholomew. I'm one of the technical people at Unisys that will give you a little bit more technical depth about some of the things that Thanga mentioned, and also set up to point you at additional information. One of the things that I think was mentioned, but I want to make sure is known that in addition to the standard document set, which is available today, there will be a series of YouTube videos which go into a little more technical depth than what I'm talking about here, done by our engineering team, and they will be posted in a few weeks, and you'll receive an email about that. And they'll be also accessible off our site as well. Okay, sorry, having just a little, there we go. As Venka mentioned, AB Suite is using and adapted for Visual Studio 2017, and the thing I wanted to anchor here is that it requires Visual Studio 2017, the earlier versions that were associated with the earlier versions of AB Suite are no longer supported. In addition to helping us keep pace with the Microsoft lifecycle, one of the things that 2017 does bring to the table is that it does install significantly faster than the previous versions of Visual Studio, and it also is generally a more responsive IDE, so you will be able to pick up that benefit overall in addition to the features that we are talking about with respect to AB Suite. Now, to amplify a little more on the security features that are coming for the MCP Runtime platform, I'm going to step through this to anchor it in, as I said, just a little bit more detail, and to anchor, I'll say how you would use it, why you would use it, and again emphasize that these are capabilities that you can take advantage of, but as I'll say in a lot of places, you're not forced to use these features. I'm going to talk about it in sort of an outside-in perspective, in other words, talking about data in motion, then having gotten the data into the ClearPath, you have the data at rest inside DMS2, and then I'll touch on your ongoing system administration and operation. As mentioned, we have provided support to use SSL for the remote access or rattle pipe between the component enabler and the ClearPath AB Suite host. SSL is the generic term. This, of course, is using the TLS 1.2 version, which has superseded the previous, more obsoleted standards of SSL. But typically, everything is always called an SSL certificate or whatnot. But in all cases, this does mean the TLS 1.2 version of the protocol. It's pretty straightforward to configure. I just sort of showed some snippets here to anchor what you need to do when you use this feature. You update your CCF file, whether you do that by hand or through mark commands. Instead of rattle PCM, you use rattle SSL PCM, and that's pretty much straightforward. Then you percolate and reuse the URL there to change to the rattle SSL tag. I showed just a fragment here, not as an instructional case, but just to show something from specifically from the ASP.NET portion of Component Enabler, as where you set the protocol version. But this is applicable across all the interface types available for Component Enabler, are able to be used if you encrypt the pipe. A question that had come up at one time, this is not changing anything about the rattle protocol, it's merely securing the transport layer. So you do not have to turn this on if you do not want to, and it is not changing anything within the protocol of rattle itself. Having gotten our data into the ClearPath, which obviously has been there for a while, but again, looking at the outside-in perspective, we now have, as Thanga mentioned, the ability to encrypt data inside the database. Now, one of the things I've thought I'd try to explain here is that in order to use the encryption feature, it requires the coordination of three different AB Suite properties at different levels. So I just will briefly explain, I'll say what goes where. Obviously there's additional documentation. There's obviously going to be some good videos on how you set this up. That's one of the demos, but I thought it would be useful to anchor sort of the where this gets set and what object controls what type of properties, because it may not be intuitive from especially from reading the doc. So whether data is encrypted or whether data masking is used is a property of the class or the ISPEC. It uses the secure technique is the literal name of the property, but that is put on the class. However, only individual attributes can be selected for encryption, not the whole class. So while you define whether you're going to use either masking or data encryption on the at the class level, the individual attributes are what need to be set in order to enable the encryption. Similarly, if you've decided to use encryption, the actual mechanism algorithm that is used for encryption is based on these choices that Thanga mentioned earlier. The ESGCM algorithm and the HMAC algorithm are your two choices, or similarly none. At that point, that is the segment property, and that controls the type of data encryption that's done with respect to the algorithm. Finally, the individual attributes that we show down here are where you say is secure or is not secure. And so to sum it all up, the ISPEC properties define whether data is encrypted or masked. The segment property defines which type of algorithm is used if you enable encryption. And then finally, the individual properties set to define if that attribute will be secured. Now, there are some restrictions on what can be secured. You cannot secure a key field in a class, and there's a little more detail in the documentation on some of the restrictions, but mostly it revolves around keys and key set areas. But with this feature, we think that, as Thanga said, you'll be able to now exploit the capabilities that were provided in MCP 18. Obviously, you need MCP 18 to do this. And what I did mean to mention here is, perhaps not too surprisingly, setting these attributes will cause a database reorganization. So in order to enable encryption on the database, this will cause the database reorganization to take place. So to conclude, I'll say the security part of my presentation here. I'll talk a little bit more and amplify on what I called here the data security during system administration and operation. So now you have a system and it's been running. You now have the option to exploit the sensitive data attribute for DMS files. So harkening back to Thanga's description, what this allows us to do is basically cause the overall MCP system in its file management to scrub files, records, before they're reused for any other purpose, and to add additional security, during the ongoing administration of your system, which can include when disks are decommissioned and sent to wherever you dispose them. This is an additional method that will help to ensure that your data cannot fall into the hands of the wrong people. I didn't put pictures here, but I did want to note, just again to sort of anchor it and give it, this is a property that you set on the segments of your application. So that's what controls whether or not you use the sensitive data property of the underlying file system. Similarly, in in the previous AB Suite releases, we did have the ability to set logging or access for database management verbs or commands, operations, might be a term more familiar with, but verbs is pretty standard in database management. However, but it was pretty much an all or nothing operation. You could turn it on or you could turn it off. Now you have the ability to specify specific database management verbs for logging, and that will give you a finer grain control that you may want to take advantage of. And then finally, we do have the ability to now set a audit trail encryption and compression options. This does occur during when the audit file is copied to tape. There's instructions on how you set it up. It's relatively straightforward, but it is slightly more complicated than just clicking on an individual property. But basically, you specify attributes which are documented in our docs that will tell you where you put your special commands from inside the AB Suite environment. Now I want to talk a little bit at a high level about some of the things we've done to the Intrinsic model property. And this, I'll try not to get too deep into the weeds, but want to give some background, I'll say, of some things that were done, just the touch of why they were done to enable both features that are coming in this release of 7.0 as well as future enhancements. AB Suite since its inception has always been an object-oriented language model environment. However, initially, AB Suite tended to what we call overload the use of the term inheritance to mean both what it standardly means in an object context of making a more specialized class from a master or superclass, but also the term inheritance was used on properties that to essentially define the type. So it would instantiate a property, instantiate an instance of a class when you use the inheritance property. And that could be a little confusing for developers that were coming to AB Suite from, I'll say, knowing the traditional object-oriented terminology. This was a source of, I'll say, complaints and feedback from users. So now what we've done is inheritance means what it should mean, and that is inheritance from classes. It's solely on its traditional purpose. It's no longer associated with an instantiating class. Similarly, and somewhat aligned with this, we went to, in the previous implementations, everything was a class, and with everything being class, that meant even simple numbers, strings, and whatnot were classes and had internal structure to them. And we decided that, well, let's let numbers and strings be numbers and strings and be primitives. So we have enabled a new item, a primitive type, to define strings, numbers, dates, and the other items that make up primitives. As I said, they no longer inherit from a class. You can use the template property to specify that what the type is, and I'll touch on that a little better, a little different in a subsequent slide. Now, this applies both to your user-defined attributes as well as the framework attributes, most commonly all the primitives associated with GLB, and I'll touch on that in a subsequent couple of slides here. As with all the features that we talk about here, as a model is imported, upgraded to 7.0, that all of these conversions, this internal structure is handled for you so that it is a transparent upgrade, and now you can take advantage of these features as you go forward. One of the practical benefits that this creates is that now if you're familiar with value checking logic, which is basically a validation expression that you can put on previously a class, to do checking on things that are some type of input field, either input or IO. Now that it can be, that's specified on a per use basis, so that if you needed to or wanted to tailor that value checking logic for the specific instance, you now have the ability to do this. It's no longer specified on the class. Now, to the point I previously made about importing and upgrading your model to 7.0, all of the value checking logic that you've assigned to classes will be percolated and filtered down to the individual attributes here, as I showed, and you will not have to make any changes to have everything work the way you're used to working. You'll be able to then take advantage of this if you so choose. I mentioned the template property and wanted to expand on that in this framework. So basically, the type of data that a attribute of class can hold can either still be defined with the primitive property, but it can also be defined with the template property. And templates were introduced as a concept a couple of releases ago, but now they take on the ability to allow either a primitive, a class, or an interface to be consistently reused. So now if you wanted to define types of numbers that are restricted in range, a given size of a field and whatnot, you do that by defining templates. Similarly, in terms of, I'll say, straightening out the language and making things a little more understandable, a file is now no longer something that's inherited from the GLB file, but has instead now been promoted to a first-class stereotype. So in the same way that you define iSpecs, reports, frames, you now have the ability to have a file is a stereotype. And I'll set up for why we did that. We'll be talking about blobs or binary files or binary large objects in just a subsequent slide. But previously, the binary file for the ClearPath was defined as a binary type primitive, and what that implied then was that it was a file, and that was in 6.1 and earlier releases. Now, basically, when you add a new attribute that you want to be a file or an external binary, as I call its name here, you basically use the template from the framework binary file. So it's a little more explicit and a little more clear about exactly what you're doing. And in part, we did that to set up for the handling and support for internal blobs or binary large objects, or for simplicity, I'll just say files for the rest of this talk, or at least try to. As we said, this allows for storage of PDF files, TIFF files, any binary file into the database. Obviously, there's a lot of enterprise content management systems out there, and we're not trying to compete at that level. But what this does allow you to do is, if there are objects that you want to store in the database itself, that to take advantage of the integrity, take advantage of the security that we talked about, you now have the ability to augment the external blob file management with the internal blob. To use an internal blob, you need to define an external blob, and it is a two-step process. You set the file name, and then you either read or write. One of the things that I thought I wanted to kind of amplify or clarify here, because to me, when I listen to it, it can somehow seem, I'll say backwards or somewhat counterintuitive, is you use the read operation to store into the database, and you use the write operation or method to retrieve. What that anchors to, and a way to kind of help you remember the sense of what's going on, is that it's it's really referring to, I'll say, the file. And so that's the sense or the orientation from which this comes. In other words, when you read the file, what you're reading it and doing is putting it into the database. Similarly, when you write the file, what you're doing is taking it out of the DMS database and putting it into that file that's on the ClearPath file system. And that's just something that I wanted to point out, because the read and the write sense may not be as intuitive when you hear it described in some of our tutorials. As Thanga mentioned, we do also have increased control over the runtime behavior in any, I'll say, platform or system such as AB Suite. One of the balancing acts you always have to do is what are the things that you want to do on behalf of the user and hide details from them, which is a large part of what model-driven development does. At the same time, you want to provide our users or developers the ability to control some things that perhaps originally we didn't, we try to take care of that generally on ourselves, but now allow people, if they so choose, to take advantage of a finer level of control. As we mentioned on runtime transactions, you can define resource constraints in terms of the processor, database access, and if those limits are exceeded, basically the interrupt method fires, you now have the ability to take control if you want, and choose, I'll say, what to do in that case, whether to continue or whatever type of logic you so choose to use. Again, this is not something that you must do, it's something that you can do. Similarly, on reports, users have requested the ability to control whether or not you do get an automatic restart of a report, and now this is controlled from within the language. From within the method, you can basically set a value that says whether you want to be notified of failures. Similarly, the GOB status gives you the understanding that in fact the report has failed, and you can choose to take a different sort of action than the standard default action of restarting. You may want to take something offline, go and do some type of manual repair or investigation before the report just starts up again. This gives you the ability to control doing that. For online transactions, you now similarly have the ability to know that a transaction is being replayed by comms after failure, and choose to react differently when a transaction is being replayed. Again, you're not forced to do this, it gives you the ability to do this. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the aspect of what we've called here developer productivity, and kind of anchors in slightly more detail some of the things that Thanga mentioned in terms of what we're trying to do to increase overall productivity. One of the small, but I think incredibly useful features that was added is a simpler, easier way to add attributes to a class. One of the things that I highlighted here was the next button. So while pointing and clicking within Visual Studio is perhaps better than having to pound out a lot of physical code, which is one of the advantages of model-driven development, you can get some point-and-click fatigue when adding attributes. Through this feature, if you select OK, then you've defined the one attribute. If you select Next, you stay within the same view, get a new pop-up, and now are able to define the next attribute without going back and clicking things. And basically is a small thing, but to me this is something that I think many folks will find very useful and very helpful in a practical way. We integrated the logic editor with the Visual Studio editor to start to take advantage of the inbuilt capabilities of Visual Studio and its editing capabilities. We did that in the last release. We're now continuing to extend this. One of the things we're doing within that on 7.0 that you'll see from within the editor is that it will now automatically detect whether you do have undefined methods or attributes, detecting meaning the little commonly red squiggly underline there. And similarly, along with the IntelliSense features of quick action, if you want to, and if your style of development is you'd rather sort of framework out code and then fill in the details later, what you have the ability to do on the right click when you have these this is an undefined method come up, you're able to select the create the method, and it will determine the context and basically predefine an empty method for you with the right type signature, which you can then go in and fill out the actual logic that you need. But at least it will give you the framework to allow you to have a different way to define your items as you go on. Another feature that I think will be of significant benefit here is the Format All Logic tool. So under the tools and system modelers, one of the things we've added is the Format All Logic command or tool. This replaces some of the things that Reeldor used to do as an offline type of action. It's not intended to be fully readable over here, so I do apologize for that. But the idea, the purpose of hitting this tool is that in the tools options, you also have the ability to set the editor styles for the LDL Plus language, which is what AB Suite uses. And it gives you kind of the whether you want to use the standard form of commands abbreviated, whether you want to use move versus assignment and so on, and a little bit about deleting lines and empty lines and things of that nature. This now allows you to I'll say clean up or otherwise standardize those styles from within the editor itself, and not escape out to an external tool, nor similarly take care of it by hand. So I think this will be a useful feature to as a clean up or otherwise standardize your code according to your desired standards that you've set for formatting, if you so choose to take advantage of it. One of the things that we looked at to improve the overall productivity is the debugger. One of the things that any developer, architect, whatever term you want to use, spends a lot of time debugging. And so one of the best things that we thought we could do is make the overall debugger a little faster and also add some new features, and I'll talk on them. But in previous releases of AB Suite, you had to set up and control, I'll say, what you were debugging by a property. That property has now disappeared, but been replaced by auto configuration. So basically, the initial, database will be created for you, and you'll be able to specify whether you're debugging a method, a report, or the overall online transaction more intuitively by clicking on the object and then pressing or clicking start or step into. Start will break on the first breakpoint that you've set. Step into basically steps into the first item and allows you to go in and either step through it, set more breakpoints, or whatever you want to do. A significant feature that I think you'll see a lot of enjoyment out of is that reports now debug within the current Visual Studio instance. In previous versions, this would fire up a different instance of Visual Studio, run the report there. Now it is forked off as a thread from within the same instance. That'll be significantly faster startup time, you'll see, as you go off and initiate a report debug session. On the functional side of debugging, we've added what's called an immediate window, and what this gives is a read eval print loop for AB Suite. The immediate window is someplace where you can type in and evaluate expressions, execute statements, print variables. The little example that I show here is, we're now at set up a breakpoint, move forward to this line, and I now have the ability to enter in what's inside the numbers array. It'll print that out, concatenate or as individual values. I can similarly inspect what's the value of total, and I can call a method. Not particularly exciting in this example, but you can see the power that now you're able to do more online I'll say debugging as you can do in certain other languages that you may be familiar with. So I think this will be another very useful feature for the base to help with the debugging style. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about, hopefully between Thanga and myself, we've told you about the features that we've added to 7.0 to make it appealing. Now I want to talk about, well, how do you get to 7.0? And in this case, I want to expand just a little bit about upgrading to 7.0 from EAE, because we know we still have a very large and important EAE base. So we had introduced some features to assist those coming from EAE. As mentioned earlier, it leverages the mode concept that's a property of the model, and that property is what we created to be and called a standard model or standard mode. And there's two main benefits that come from using this mode. It affects, I'll say, how a developer maintains and creates the models, taking away some of the features or hiding the features until you're ready to use them. That's a common theme through a lot of what we've said here today on all these features is there's capabilities here when you're ready to use them, if you want to use them. But another key benefit that I want to stress is what this means for the life cycle of the ongoing application, because clearly, as Thanga mentioned, we have clients with EA applications that were decades in the making and evolution, and people have been on EA for a very long time. So having gotten all the value from EAE, and now you're continuing to develop your applications in EAE, and having gotten what you want out of it, we want to make it a little easier for you to transition to AB Suite, because your initial perspective may not be, well, I'm not ready, or I don't need, or I've been happy with EAE and I don't need, or initially, some of the features that come from AB Suite. Well, what we've done is to create a mode that exposes and implements only the core set of features that are from an EAE application. So it can do everything an EAE application can do, leverage some of the other common attributes of the logic editor and so on. But basically, it doesn't provide too much ability to introduce you to all the features of object orientation and whatnot that you may not be interested in at the initial time. And part of what that means is that as we evolve in future releases, obviously bugs will be fixed here, but this mode stays, won't have new features added to it. Now that can sound jarring, and internally people, wait, it won't have new features. Well, that's on purpose, in the sense that you now have a stable environment that isn't going to churn with new features. Obviously, every time we we put out a release, we do our best to never have a bug, but in the reality of life, bugs happen. A lot of testing is done by clients before they move to another level. And what we've done here is constrain the feature functionality of this mode to something that basically isn't going to be changed other than to fix bugs. That should give higher confidence in you as you move to the next release, 8.0, and the rest of the life cycle, that if you've been, unless you want to exploit a new feature, new capability, you have, the base that you've been comfortable with. At the same time, though, you always have the ability to promote the model to be an advanced mode model and take advantage of everything that AB Suite has to offer. Okay. I already verbalized this, so just to kind of give you the high-level tour and not take up more of your time, the basic thing that standard mode does is basically hide the main object-oriented features of AB Suite of inheritance, encapsulation, polymorphism, so that your interface and the property pages are slightly less cluttered. I won't say that it's a demonstrable effect, but basically, if you do not want to take advantage of those class features, they're hidden off. This development paradigm is closer to the paradigm that you used to for EAE. Similarly, as I noted earlier, both for a variety of benefits, now the use of classes that was always used is now for everything. Primitives and templates are the things that define types, so you no longer have to deal with classes as simple types. So hopefully we think that paradigm can be a little more familiar to folks coming from EAE. Already discussed, at the ongoing life cycle position, standard mode will only be bug fixed. It'll have the core capabilities. It'll stay stable, and you can choose to keep applications on a standard mode model for whenever you choose, and that can be effectively forever. One thing I did mean to mention is that if you want to ignore standard mode, so to speak, when you deploy or import a model from EAE into AB Suite 7, it will come in as a standard mode. That's the only thing that restricts you into standard mode. You can certainly create a new model in standard mode as well, but EAE will first import only into standard mode. You can then immediately promote it if you so choose. So again, I want to emphasize that you're not locked into using this unless you choose to. I talked a little bit about the development life cycle, and now I want to talk a little bit for now some of the things we've done to, I'll say, help existing AB Suite users that are on 6.1 move to 7.0. Obviously, it's an import, but where I want to position a little bit of discussion about export as is in that life cycle change, as Thanga mentioned. As we said, we've always supported the ability to put your development environment at a higher IC number or level, if you will, and export and import those things into test and production, looking at sort of the standard domain of you have a development environment, a test environment, and of course your production environment. So this has always been supported. What you couldn't do, though, is come up to a 6.1 level in development, take advantage either of the new editing features that we're providing in 7.0, the productivity enhancements, but then still release a patch or an update into production on an earlier release of main release branch, like in this case I'm showing 6.1 to back to 5.0. That isn't allowed. But what you can now do is use the export as feature to develop, as I said, learn, take advantage of some of the, I'll say, core development features that we've added to try to help make model-driven development with AB Suite even easier, and export a model in a 6.1 format, and then export changes, bug fixes, critical patches, whatever you need into a 6.1 test or production environment without having to bring everything up to 7.0 in a flash update. And we'll continue to do that as we evolve in future releases of 8.0 and whatnot. This does take advantage of the P model feature, which is a separately licensed, not costed, but separately licensed features for various export, I'll say, restrictions or tracking. So it's a simple matter to get the P model license, but I did want to point that out. That's mentioned in the doc, but we think this will help and position folks to be able to, I'll say, upgrade their entire system. Upgrading your model is as simple as doing an import, but there's more than just the isolated development environment. There's test and production. So I kind of classify this under ways in which it's, I'll say, easier to get to 7.0. Of course, again, you can choose to not take advantage of this feature. The one thing we do suggest to take advantage of the features, if you believe you will want to take advantage of this and promote bug fixes or other changes into production, we recommend that what you do is go through, I'll say, of the full cycle as is. In other words, take your existing test and production application as is, put it into 7.0, export it, import it back into production, and now the internal structures will all be set up for making this mechanism work. So you do it without changes, and then you're still on 6.1, but then you can introduce changes as needed. Talked a lot about MCP runtime and other features. That export as is equally applicable to both environments, but for our Windows runtime clients, one of the things that we have done is to now support native compilation of .NET images from within the framework. This was supported previously, but it required a manual step to go offline and run some scripts that we provided. And while all that's fine, you now have the ability from within a build and from within a gen to specify that you want a .NET native image, and this should help make life a little easier, a little more productive to not have that manual step if you want to take advantage of the .NET native image feature. And so I lumped it under the overall productivity enhancements. I'm going to wrap things up by showing again the interdependency slide, or at least wrap up the product tour, if you will. This is just a repeat of Thanga's slide of the prerequisite software. As Thanga noted, in the support matrix that's up on the support site, you'll get a lot more detail if you want it on a lot more specificity about what is supported versus what has been tested on, and there's a lot of detail in that matrix. But this is sort of the high-level vision here of what is available. As noted, we now have digital download for AB Suite in version 7, so we can you now be able to download it from the ordering website, and that experience should also then be much faster to get a hold of it. And this wraps up my piece of the product tour. I'm just going to very quickly talk a little bit about about the services that we have for our AB Suite and EAE customers. We are a full-service company. Most of folks still think of us within as technology providers, whether through the ClearPath technology, whether through AB Suite technology and products, but we do provide a set of services for our clients to assist them both in AB Suite and non-AB Suite, if you will, related matters, but primarily all focusing around the basic aspects of transformation, mobilizing applications, which many of you already do, and similarly automation in terms of increasing productivity with using not just SMA OpCon as well as Operation Sentinel. And it's important to point out that the various tools and techniques that we have available, as well as other DevOps type productivity enhancements that we can support in both the Windows and ClearPath domain. We provide a service staff that can help you on both specific tools, work out a general strategy, and bring our expertise that we have with our products to mate up with your expertise in your applications. Specifically around EAE and AB Suite, we do offer a set of obviously training and different consulting services that we have for, especially around version control, because the integrate, TFS, Team Foundation Server is a very powerful tool from Microsoft. Visual Studio is a very powerful tool. AB Suite is a very powerful tool, but you combine three powerful tools, and there is, I will have to say, or I would say, a non-trivial bit of complexity that could come into play here. So we've been both improving our documentation in this area, as well as trying to improve our workshops, our classes, our consulting, to try to help ease some of the challenges that people find when they begin to adopt TFS version control, especially. Similarly, this is somewhat complicated, but if you are on EAE and are still hesitant about moving to AB Suite for all the reasons associated with change, we do offer a set of services to help you with that. Obviously, Unisys is always here to help in any capacity, but we do have a flow that we use. Not necessarily, it's clearly not the same for every client, but we're going to go through and discover what your environment is and take you through the circle till you're finally upgraded onto AB Suite. And typically when I talk about this, and it's about, there's the base movement from your EAE into AB Suite and the language capabilities that you can take advantage of. But then there's the whole infrastructure and your tooling process and how you want to use TFS if you're using TFS, some other things that might be in your environment for changes that sometimes we find that when we engage in this process with clients, they learn things from an old application that they had forgotten, that's outboard of their EAE system. So that's often a good time to also do some leveling up in support of that. So we offer a set of services around that, and I just wanted to speak to that as to end the presentation here. With that, I'll turn it over back to Matt and Thanga for any questions that you might have. And I'll redo the instructions. You enter them into the chat window. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Charlie. That does bring us to the Q&A portion of the presentation. Again, if you have questions for Charlie or Thanga, you can enter those in the chat window on the user control panel. We have had a number of questions come across here, so we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. If we don't get to your question during our live session here, we will follow up with you directly via email. The first question I had for you guys is, when will AB Suite Release 7 be available?
Yeah, Matt, I can answer. Yeah, sure, I can answer that question, Matt. So it becomes available from today. So clients can go ahead and start ordering the AB Suite 7.0 software. They can contact their respective sales representatives and start ordering. It's available from today.
Excellent. Next question I have is the XML processing feature of advanced mode available on MCP?
It is not, I'll take this one. It is not directly available within MCP at this time.
Okay. Next question is which features are MCP only and which are also available on Windows Runtime?
Let me take that one, Thanga. Basically, to summarize, and we can certainly follow up because we didn't put it in a slide, but we binned it out this way. The encryption features that I talked about are for MCP runtime only. The .NET native images, that is in Windows only. The blobs, binary large objects, are supported within the MCP. I'll say blanketly, but we'll check the details and follow up offline. Everything else we discussed is common to both runtime environments.
Okay.
And we can also we can follow up to just double check everything that we mentioned here, but that is certainly the general answer to that question, and I'll make sure that I didn't misspeak.
The next question we have is very similar. What is the release date, and then how do I get the digital download?
So, Matt, from a client ordering standpoint, they don't see a difference in terms of how they place the order. It's just that earlier they were getting it in a CD or a DVD media format. Now it's going to be digitally downloadable from the Unisys Download Center. But from an ordering standpoint, they're not going to see any difference. They do it as they have done for the previous releases, and their sales representatives can help them there.
Excellent. Next question that I have is this available for MCP Gold and MCP Silver?
Yes, it is. It fully supports the software series as with all the features discussed for the ClearPath.
Excellent. Next question is when will EAE go away?
Thanga, do you want to
Yes,
take that one
sure.
from a program perspective?
Yeah, so Matt, so we have in Unisys phase 1 and phase 2 support. Phase 1 support is when engineering provides support and the bug fixes, which is what we call it as a phase 1 support. So the end of phase 1 support for EAE is March 31st, 2023. So, and there's an announcement that we have made in the Unisys website, and we have also circulated what we call it as a CTB, Client Technical Bulletin, when we had made that announcement last year. So we give you a 5-year duration, and we had made that announcement in March of last year. And with the 5-year duration, the end of life, or rather specifically, the end of phase 1 support, which is the end of engineering support, is on March 31st, 2023.
Excellent. The next question I have is if encryption is set on data fields in DMS2, will that be automatically done during the reorganization?
That will be done as part of the reorganization. I will confirm that though offline. That's actually something I meant to double check this morning, but my understanding is that reorg will take care of things, and I will confirm or otherwise that or otherwise correct that. But I believe that will be part of the things that will happen in reorg, in addition to dealing with the keys internally and all that sort of thing.
Excellent. Then I know that we are getting close to our scheduled end time here, so we're going to wrap questions up with this last one, and then we'll give you guys just a little bit of time for closing statements. So the last question I have is, what is the overhead impact to encryption?
We'll have to follow up on how to articulate for you. That's certainly a good question. As always, your specific mileage may vary, but I will look to see if we have something more detailed that we try to articulate. I know one of the algorithms is intended to be faster and use less processing power by its nature of how it's defined. But I'll see what sort of positioning and additional data that we have for folks on that. But I'll have to get back to you on that one.
All right. As I said, that is all the time that we do have for questions today. I know that we didn't get to all the questions that came across. And again, if you still have additional questions, you can still send those in. We will follow up with you offline. But I just wanted to give it back to Thanger or Charlie and allow you guys a few moments for closing statements.
Yes, Matt. So I just want to let people know that the unisys.com, the AB Suite page has gone live, with the latest 7.0 software release announcements, and we also have the latest product information sheets. So I encourage everybody to go and take a look into it. It provides, especially the software release announcement, has more details, and the support site is also live with the latest detailed, product documentation as well. So if you want more details, that's the place to go to and check as well. And as Charlie mentioned earlier on, we'll have more detailed technical videos, and which will be published in YouTube soon. So that is something to expect in the coming few weeks. With that, I think we would like to thank you all for joining this webinar. We hope you like the new features and you benefit from them and you start using them. Charlie, do you want to add any closing comments?
No, other than I thank you very much for your attention, the opportunity to speak to you today, and hopefully together we will do great things with AB Suite and yourselves and Unisys.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie and Thanga, again for another wonderful presentation. That does conclude today's event. Again, the recorded event will be made available to you on the Unisys ClearPath YouTube channel. And we thank you all for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you.